Mu Qianfan's troubled brows were knitted together and he weakly asked Hiyu, "Can I not eat it?" Hiyu slightly raised her chin. "What do you think, Mr. Mu?" Mu Qianfan felt very aggrieved, yet this grievance was tinged with a sense of happiness, making him even more conflicted. It wasn't that he didn't want to eat, it was that he felt like throwing up before he even took a bite. Seeing the unconcealed threat in Hiyu's eyes, Mu Qianfan could only grit his teeth and compromise. "Alright then, I'll eat, you eat too. We'll eat together." To show his sincerity, Mu Qianfan quickly grabbed the spoon and took a small bite. The vegetable porridge was just as he imagined, completely flavorless and truly awful. He was genuinely hungry. Ever since successfully getting Mu Qianfan to sleep and figuring out her path forward, she had felt a profound hunger, an intense craving for food. She was a little surprised to see Mu Qianfan obey her so readily, but she accepted it with composure. Even as husband and wife, she wouldn't be his subordinate, simply agreeing to everything he said. Hiyu ate quickly. Only after she finished did she notice that Mu Qianfan's bowl of porridge was practically untouched. Displeased, she narrowed her eyes at him, her threat blatant. Cough, cough. Mu Qianfan cleared his throat, trying to hide his embarrassment, then shamelessly declared, "Wife, I feel so weak all over, I can't even hold the spoon." He saw through Mu Qianfan's intentions almost instantly. Although he did look weak, he was definitely not that helpless. Still, she patiently asked him, "And then?" Mu Qianfan continued to take his shamelessness to the next level, whining, "Then, my dear wife, could you please feed me? I haven't eaten since yesterday noon, and I threw it all up afterwards." Threw up? This he genuinely didn't know. They had eaten lunch together yesterday, and during that time, Mu Qianfan had gone to the restroom. He returned looking unwell, but only said he had a headache. Mu Qianfan realized he had said too much and quickly changed the subject. "Yes, so I should be very hungry now, and I need to eat something to regain my strength, right?" He said should because Mu Qianfan didn't feel hungry at all. The sight of food only made him feel nauseous and uncomfortable, but he also knew he had to eat. He knew Mu Qianfan was using this as an excuse to be clingy, but she couldn't find a reason to refuse. As her legal husband, what was wrong with him wanting to be a little closer to her? So, she willingly stepped into the trap Mu Qianfan had dug, picked up the bowl, and took the spoon. "Okay, I'll feed you." Now it was Mu Qianfan's turn to be stunned. He had just been wondering how he would salvage the situation if she refused. What if she hated him because of it? But happiness had arrived too suddenly. Hiyu carefully brought the spoon to Mu Qianfan's mouth, watching the fleeting surprise in his eyes. She couldn't help but inwardly chuckle. "Don't think you're the only one who can tease me." Her heart was blooming with delight, but her expression remained neutral. "Why aren't you eating? Didn't you say you wanted me to feed you?" What else could Mu Qianfan do but open his mouth? But the moment the spoon entered, his expression changed. The porridge was too hot. Poor him, he wanted to throw up but dared not, so he could only try his best to swallow it. He had clearly eaten a few bites just now. How could he have forgotten this problem? It was all Antlin's fault for not letting the porridge cool down before bringing it over. It seemed he'd have to reconsider her benefits. He looked at Mu Qianfan with a half smile and deliberately asked, "How does this porridge taste? Is it good?" What she really wanted to ask was about the temperature of the porridge, but she knew even without asking. Although it was a bit hot, it wouldn't scald him, otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to do it. Unexpectedly, while she thought herself clever, Mu Qianfan was even more cunning. He actually pointed to his mouth and complained, "It's so hot, my mouth is blistering." "Wife, blow on it for me." Hiyu. She had truly underestimated Mu Qianfan's shamelessness. Was it really okay for him to push his luck like this? Not only did he trick her into feeding him porridge, but he also wanted to use the opportunity to kiss her. Wasn't he afraid of transmitting his cold to her? But just as he was silently complaining, Mu Qianfan spoke again. "Never mind, if I pass my cold to you, I wouldn't even be able to buy regret medicine." He really wanted to ask, "Why would you regret it?" But she held back. She had been flirted with enough for today. She didn't want to hear any more words that would make her heart flutter. But Mu Qianfan didn't miss the opportunity, immediately adding, "Rather than watching you suffer from illness, I'd rather be critically ill myself, let alone be the one to infect you." Hiyu's heart was naturally stirred by Mu Qianfan again. To cover her nervousness, she quickly scooped a spoonful of porridge and brought it to his mouth, intending to use the food to silence him. This time, Mu Qianfan didn't hesitate. He opened his mouth, ready to take the spoon, but just as he did, Hiyu had already pulled her hand back. The scene was quite awkward. He looked at Hiyu awkwardly, his mouth still open, thinking he had displeased her by being too eager. But then he saw her bring the spoon to her own mouth, blow on it a few times, and then offer it to him. Seeing Hiyu's considerate gesture, Mu Qianfan couldn't help but softly say, "Thank you." Hiyu's mood was getting better and better. She smiled and said, "What's there to thank?" This is my responsibility and my honor. She even wanted to say that if he dared to let any other woman do such a thing for him in the future, she would never forgive him, but she thought better of it. Their relationship hadn't reached that point yet. Because he genuinely had no appetite and felt like throwing up before he even swallowed, Mu Qianfan ate very slowly. But he seemed to know, and patiently continued to feed him. Several times, Mu Qianfan almost threw up, but as soon as he saw Hiu painstakingly feeding him, he forced himself to swallow, unwilling to let her effort be in vain. Each time this happened, he would have him drink some water, then pause feeding the porridge, resuming only after he had recovered. This was her first time caring for a sick person in her life. But they cooperated very well. This was probably their most harmonious interaction since their marriage, but it would definitely not be the last. Even so, this single bowl of porridge took nearly an hour. Thankfully, Mu Qianfan not only finished it all but also didn't throw it up, a result he himself hadn't expected. Aunt Lin quickly collected the meal box. Hiyu took Mu Qianfan's temperature. He hadn't developed a high fever again as she had previously feared, but his low fever hadn't subsided yet. Hiyu chatted with Mu Qianfan for a while, and then it was time for him to take his medicine. Naturally, Mu Qianfan seized the opportunity to be shameless again, asking Hiyu to feed him the medicine, acting like a spoiled patient, which made her unable to hold back a laugh. Sharing a bed for several months, how had she not realized that Mu Qianfan was actually an overgrown child? His whining was even less mature than a child's. The medicine had a certain sedative effect. Not long after taking it, Mu Qianfan became drowsy, his eyes hazy, yet filled with anticipation as he said, "Wife, I'm so sleepy." He looked at Mu Qianfan with a tenderness she didn't even know she possessed. "If you're sleepy, then sleep. When you wake up, we'll have dinner. You should be able to eat something else tonight." Mu Qianfan scooted closer to the edge of the bed, then patted the empty space beside him. "Wifey, stay with me." He naturally refused. "I'm not sleepy. You sleep on your own." Mu Qianfan yawned, trying hard to keep his eyes open. "Then I'm not sleepy either. Let's keep chatting." He looked at Mu Qianfan, who clearly could barely keep his eyes open, with a wry smile, and could only agree. Anyway, she had taken the day off and had nothing else to do there. As soon as she climbed onto the bed, Mu Qianfan's hand, the one without an four needle, reached out and pulled her into his embrace. "Hiyu, I hope to have you for the rest of my life." He snuggled into his arms without speaking, but the slight upward curve of her lips silently told him that she was willing, and that she also hoped to have him by her side in the future. Even if Mu Qianfan's words were a lie, he would savor it, her only request being that if he lied, he should lie to her for a lifetime. However, she felt that he was sincere towards her. With his beloved in his arms, Mu Qianfan quickly fell asleep, but Hiyu couldn't sleep. Too much had happened in the past few days, all of it impacting her life. She wasn't someone obsessed with love, and in the past, she hadn't even dared to hope for it. Although she now had expectations for Mu Qianfan, it didn't mean she would become a slave to love. She saw and appreciated Mu Qianfan's kindness towards her, but their lives were still very long, so long that no one could guarantee what the future held or if they could truly stay together for eternity. This wasn't her worrying unnecessarily. She simply didn't want to be short-sighted and live only in the present. She had to be responsible for her own life, and naturally, she had to plan for the future. For example, if he was truly deceiving her, how would she protect herself and make him willingly deceive her for a lifetime? If he could deceive her for a lifetime, then even a lie would become true. Hugh thought for a long time, and about many things. Perhaps Mu Qianfan's embrace was too warm and provided an inexplicable sense of security, because eventually, the person who had been wide awake also drifted off to sleep. They both slept soundly and sweetly. When they woke up, Mu Qianfan's low fever had finally subsided, and he was more energetic. His gaze towards Hiyu became even more ardent and gentle. Hiyu couldn't stand his gaze, so she quickly pressed the service bell for the doctor to come and examine him, to see when he could fully recover, so she could arrange for his discharge. After all, a hospital wasn't as comfortable as home. After the examination, the doctor said that Mu Qianfan had no major issues. He would need to stay for another day of observation, and if there were no other problems, he could be discharged, but he needed to rest well in the near future. Given that wealthy people tend to eat rich and heavy meals at the drop of a hat, which isn't good for someone recovering from a serious illness, the doctor couldn't say it directly, so he tactfully advised eating bland food as much as possible. Mu Qianfan didn't care what he ate. What he cared about was when he could be discharged. Hearing this, he frowned slightly, clearly displeased. "Another day?" The doctor explained. "Your high fever came on very suddenly, and the low fever lingered for a long time. We're concerned there might be other issues we haven't detected, so we'd like to observe you for another day." Mu Qianfan wanted to refuse. Firstly, a hospital wasn't a good place, and he disliked it. Secondly, there were many company matters waiting for him to handle, and he didn't have that much time. But before he could speak, Hiyu interjected. It's fine. Let's observe for another day then. The doctor and nurse quickly left, leaving only Hiyu and Mu Qianfan in the room again. However, it wasn't as awkward as it had been that morning, as their relationship had taken a significant step forward. Feeling a bit more energetic, Mu Qianfan no longer wanted to lie in bed. Since he couldn't be discharged, he decided to handle company matters at the hospital. So, the next moment, he picked up his phone and called Lin Shujia. Because of Wen Jin's call that morning, Lin Shujia hadn't dared to disturb Mu Qianfan since. He and Wen Jin had handled even the biggest company matters themselves, afraid of interrupting their boss's romantic endeavors. Suddenly receiving a call, Lin Shujia felt a little panicked and meekly called out, Young master? Mu Qianfan immediately adopted his cold CEO persona and emotionlessly instructed, I'll be staying in the hospital for another day. Bring over the documents that need to be processed and bring my laptop as well. Lin Shujia was overjoyed. Yes, yes, I'll be right there. Heaven knew how many important documents had piled up in Mu Qianfan's office. Documents that he and Wen Jin had no authority to handle but didn't dare to proactively bring over, so they had just been sitting there. After hanging up, Lin Shujia smiled at Wen Jin and said, The young master is finally willing to do some proper work. We're saved. If he didn't deal with it soon, I was really going to be driven crazy by those people. Wen Jin stared intently at her computer, not even sparing Lin Shujia a glance, merely nodding and saying, I know. I'll find an opportunity to relay those words truthfully to the young master. Lin Shujia's face immediately fell. Hey, would you die if you didn't threaten me? Is it really okay to always build your happiness on my suffering? Wen Jin looked up at Lin Shujia, her face devoid of expression, and said, Although I don't feel happy, I'm just being professional. But if you're suffering, that seems quite good. Lin Shujia was on the verge of tears. Forget it, I'll just obediently go deliver the documents and laptop to the young master. When I get back, let's eat together, my treat. Wen Jin asked doubtfully, It's not a special day today. Why are you treating? Lin Shujia gnashed his teeth. One who eats from another is beholden, one who takes from another is indebted. I cannot argue you, but can I at least shut you up? Wen Jin nodded. That's a good method. On your way, remember to calculate how many meals you'll need to treat me to successfully shut my mouth. Lin Shujia. How could this woman be so devoid of human kindness? From childhood, he had been completely dominated by her. Would such a strong and cold person ever get married? The ward, Mu Qianfan was chatting with Hiyu when Hiyu's phone suddenly rang. It was Yang Yi calling to ask which hospital she was in. He was planning to visit after work. Hiyu wasn't actually sick, so if Yang Yi came, her cover would be blown immediately. She quickly refused. No need, Director Yang. I'm fine. I'll be back at the office tomorrow. Upon hearing the words Director Yang, Mu Qianfan's gaze immediately changed, reflecting an anger of having his possessions coveted by someone else. And Hiyu even got up and went outside to avoid him. Yang Yi, rejected by Hiyu, was relentless. It's fine. I'm not busy today anyway. What would you like for dinner? I can bring it over for you. Hiyu greatly regretted why, when Yang Yi first asked where she hadn't lied and said she was resting at home, instead insisting on honestly answering that she was still in the hospital. It wasn't too late to trick Yang Yi now. After realizing this, Hiyu immediately said, Thank you, Director. But really, it's not necessary. I'm processing my discharge papers and will be home soon. Going home. Yang Yi finally stopped pestering her. It seems you really are fine. Then let's meet at the company tomorrow. We can have lunch together. There's something I need to tell you. Hiyu didn't mind working with Yang Yi, but she was still reluctant to have a private meal with him. What is it? Can't you just say it at the company? Any time would be fine. But Yang Yi gave her an offer she couldn't refuse. It's about the competition, but I'll be very busy tomorrow, so lunch is the only time I'll be free. With only a few days left until the competition, Yang Yi was indeed very busy, so Hiyu had no choice but to agree. After all, she wasn't actually repulsed by Yang Yi. Alright, then I'll see you at the company tomorrow. As he walked out with her phone, Mu Qianfan wanted to follow her. In his heart, Yang Yi had always been his love rival, so of course, he wanted to know the enemy's situation. However, that was just a momentary impulse. He quickly calmed down and didn't follow her out because he needed to give Hiyu a basic level of trust. Even if Yang Yi truly had feelings for Hiyu, as long as Hiyu herself loved him, why should he bother making an unnecessary fuss and appearing to distrust her so much? Hiyu was an independent individual with her own thoughts, and she was so outstanding that someone liking her only proved that person had good taste. He should be happy for Hiyu, not eavesdrop on her phone call. That wasn't the behavior of a gentleman. Although he didn't pride himself on being a gentleman, at least he wasn't a petty person. Mu Qianfan was still adjusting his mindset when he finished her call and returned. Such a quick conversation meant only a few words were exchanged, so Yang Yi clearly stood no chance. Looking at He with a good mood, Mu Qianfan's lips curved into a smile, a somewhat goofy smile, just like the expression Lin Shujia secretly photographed in Jinghai last time. He couldn't help but be slightly startled. What's wrong with you? What are you smiling about? Mu Qianfan continued to grin foolishly. It feels so good to have you by my side. I really like it. He felt herself being flirted with again and quickly changed the subject. What do you want to eat? I'm going to call Aunt Lin. Mu Qianfan slightly reined in his silliness. You decide. I'll listen to whatever my wife says. Soon after, Lin Shijia arrived late with a large pile of important documents and Mu Qianfan's laptop. When he saw Hiyu, his gaze dared not linger. As someone who grew up with Mu Qianfan, he knew Mu Qianfan's personality very well. Protective, petty, cunning, and domineering. There were some things even he dared not touch. Moreover, he was Mu Qianfan's wife, not some object. Let alone Mu Qianfan, even if it were just an ordinary man, he should keep his eyes in check. A friend's wife is not to be trifled with. Mu Qianfan hadn't been to the company all day, so Lin Shujia certainly had matters to report. Hiyu, being tactful, temporarily excused herself. Such thoughtfulness naturally pleased Mu Qianfan greatly. Lin Shujia asked with concern, Young master, are you feeling better? No problems. Mu Qianfan casually picked up a document, nodded while flipping through it, and said, I'm all right. Anything happened at the company today? Lin Shujia pulled up a chair and sat down, smiling and shaking his head. With me at the company, what is there for young master to worry about? All the issues that need handling are right here. Mu Qianfan looked up and shot Lin Shujia a disdainful glance. It's precisely because you're there that I'm worried. Lin Shujia awkwardly scratched his head. If I'm unreliable, isn't there still Xiaojin? She's as cautious as her name suggests, just not exactly gentle like one. Mu Qianfan lowered his head and continued to skim through the documents. Remember to repeat that to Wenjin when you get back. Tell her I'm very much looking forward to her reaction. Lin Shujia had a mournful expression. Young master, can we not be so relentless? Xiaojin's personality is already 70 to 80% like yours. If it continues, I'll die. Mu Qianfan said earnestly. Then put her to death and she will live. It's better for her to be like me than to be led astray by you. At least leave me with one reliable person. Lin Shujia helplessly massaged his forehead. Well, there's still a lot of work for me to handle at the company. Young master's time is precious too, so I won't delay you. I'm going back. Goodbye. Without waiting for Mu Qianfan to respond, Lin Shujia fled, as if his rear was on fire. His escape left Hiyu, who was in the corridor outside, momentarily stunned, thinking they had argued. Hello, madam. Goodbye, madam. As Lin Shujia passed Hiyu, he paused only briefly, left these 8 words, and then vanished like a gust of wind. He stared blankly at Lin Shujia's departing back for a long while before she reacted. Just as she was about to turn back to the hospital room, she saw him suddenly run back. Lin Shujia ran breathlessly in front of Hiyu and panted, Madam, there's something I almost forgot to ask you. Hiyu resisted the urge to twitch her mouth and asked as calmly as possible. What is it? Please speak. Lin Shujia glanced at the hospital room not far away and lowered his voice. Madam, do you know the fastest way to bring down a fever? Although neither he nor Wenjin had come to the hospital today, they had kept in touch with the doctor. He had just remembered Mu Qianfan's persistent fever before, which was why he specifically ran back. Hiyu thought for a moment. Isn't it by getting an injection and taking fever medicine? Lin Shujia shook his head, leaned in, and whispered a few words to Hiyu. Hiyu's face immediately flushed, then spread to her earlobes, turning so red it looked like it could drip blood. Looking at the crimson-faced Hiyu, Lin Shujia felt quite puzzled. Why was she blushing so much? Hadn't she been married to young master for several months? She even made young master so exhausted he suffered from kidney deficiency. However, he didn't have time to think so much now and cautiously instructed, Madam, you absolutely must not say this came from me, especially not to Mr. Mu. Otherwise, you might have to collect my body. Leaving this instruction, Lin Shujia once again turned into a gust of wind, running straight to the elevator entrance. Once inside the elevator, he let out a triumphant laugh. Young master, you always threaten and criticize me. This time, let's see how I can trick you. Even if I don't get you today, there will always be opportunities in the future. Lin Shujia left the hospital laughing, his previous pent-up frustration greatly relieved by how cleverly he had used Hiyu to dig a pit for Mu Qianfan. Hiyu took a while to compose herself outside, waiting until her face was no longer so hot before she pretended to be nonchalant and returned to the hospital room. Mu Qianfan was busy with official business. Hearing Hiyu enter, he merely looked up to greet her, then buried himself back in the important documents at hand. He finished reading, signed where necessary, and didn't notice that Hiyu's eyes seemed to be glued to him, intently watching his every move. This was the first time Hiyu had personally watched Mu Qianfan work. Though not in an office, his demeanor remained serious, and a serious man was the most attractive. It turned out her man was just as charming when he was working intently. Her heart suddenly pounded so fast, as if it was about to leap out of her chest. Her man was truly handsome, especially when signing documents. His posture couldn't have been more dashing. She secretly piqued, and his handwriting was actually as handsome as the man himself. Mu Qianfan was someone who kept work and personal life distinctly separate. When it was time for serious business, he generally wouldn't be disturbed by external factors. Thus, it was a while before he noticed a pair of eyes intently staring at him. He looked up and met Hiyu's heated gaze, which scared Hiyu, making two blushes fly onto her cheeks. She then quickly turned her face away, avoiding his sight. Hiyu's heart pounded even faster than before. Mu Qianfan had looked up so suddenly, and she had been too engrossed in watching, not reacting at all. Would looking at a man so intently make her seem shameless? Mu Qianfan saw Hiyu's ardent gaze and was naturally very happy inside, but he couldn't show it now, otherwise, it would only make her feel more awkward. So he said to Hiyu apologetically, "I'm sorry, I was so focused on my work that I forgot about you. Are you feeling bored? Would you like me to chat with you?" Hiyu, flattered, shook her head, stood up and walked out. "And no, it's fine. I'm not bored. You continue working, I'll go see if Aunt Lin has arrived." Mu Qianfan still wanted to say something, but Hiyu had already fled the ward as if escaping. He couldn't help but curve his lips into a smile, finally seeing her in such a flustered state. Later, Hiyu never returned to the ward, but she didn't actually go to check if Aunt Lin had arrived either. She just sat on a chair in the corridor outside the ward, calming herself down while waiting for Aunt Lin. When Aunt Lin arrived, Hiyu went back to the ward with her. With a third person present, the atmosphere in the ward was different. This was the first time she had ever wished for an outsider to be present. Mu Qianfan was busy until Aunt Lin came to deliver dinner, when he finally had to temporarily pull himself away from the pile of documents, intending to eat dinner first, and then continue working. He was genuinely busy lately. Yang Yi was already swamped just managing the small beauty company, while Mu Qianfan not only had Xingyue Media but also matters in Jinghai to tend to, making him naturally even busier. Aunt Lin was very observant. She set out the tableware and exited the ward, still leaving Hiyu alone to face Mu Qianfan, which made Hiyu groan inwardly, not even daring to look at Mu Qianfan. But precisely because Mu Qianfan was so busy, plus he was much better physically, he didn't make a fuss during dinner that evening, eating whatever was given to him, and incidentally asked about Yang Yi's previous call. Hiyu had always worried that Mu Qianfan would behave shamelessly towards her, but regarding the incident where she had stared at him with heated eyes, he didn't even mention it, and his expression was perfectly serious. Was she judging a gentleman with the heart of a villain? But he had repeatedly pushed the boundaries of his shamelessness throughout this extremely long day, hadn't he? How could she know that although Mu Qianfan was shameless, he knew how to exercise restraint and wouldn't make her too embarrassed? He was a smart man who knew what he could and couldn't do. For example, regarding Yang Yi's phone call, he didn't ask earlier but waited until now and acted so nonchalant, simply because he didn't want Hiyu to think he was intentionally paying attention to Yang Yi. Imagine if Mu Qianfan had asked what Yang Yi wanted as soon as Hiyu finished the call. It would definitely feel like questioning or suspecting her, right? But now, chatting casually during dinner, because Hiyu mentioned going to work tomorrow, Mu Qianfan seized the opportunity to ask about the call, making it seem less deliberate and not off-putting. There was no unspeakable relationship between Hiyu and Yang Yi. The previous call was purely for work. So, Hiyu didn't conceal anything and truthfully informed Mu Qianfan. Most people might think Yang Yi was just making an excuse to have lunch with Hiyu, but Mu Qianfan was someone who had been busy before, sometimes so busy he didn't even have time to eat. So, although he wasn't particularly keen on Yang Yi having lunch with Hiyu tomorrow, he didn't object. He didn't want to control Hiyu too much. She needed her freedom. After dinner, Mu Qianfan continued working. Hiyu, meanwhile, went home, took a shower, changed clothes, then packed Mu Qianfan's change of clothes and toiletries to bring back. Mu Qianfan's illness was no longer serious. He only needed to stay in the hospital for one night, with no need for someone to stay up with him. He also couldn't bear to make Hiyu squeeze onto the hospital bed with him. When it was getting late, Mu Qianfan urged Hiyu to go home. She had to get up early for work tomorrow and hadn't rested well last night, so she needed to catch up on sleep tonight. Hiyu had also planned to go home tonight. Hospital beds surely couldn't compare to the big bed at home. If she stayed, she would have to squeeze with Mu Qianfan. It wasn't that she disliked the small bed. She just couldn't bear for Mu Qianfan to not get a good night's sleep while sick. So, for his sake, she also had to go home. Before she left for home, Mu Qianfan stretched out a finger and pointed at his face. Wife, a good night kiss.
Give it to me first tonight.
When I'm completely well, I'll give you one when I get home. He was still afraid of transmitting his cold to Hiyu. Hiyu complained inwardly, thinking that, sure enough, she always had to guard against his shameless behavior. Then, without acting coy or affected, she directly leaned down and kissed Mu Qianfan's face. Mu Qianfan raised the corner of his mouth in satisfaction. My wife is so good. Thank you, my dear wife. Don't come to the hospital tomorrow since you have work. Wait for my return gift at home. As for what the return gift was, he certainly wouldn't tell her now. Hiyu indeed didn't have time to come tomorrow. Morning for work, lunch with Yang Yi, afternoon for work again. By the time she finished work, Mu Qianfan should have already been discharged. Thinking this, she nodded. Okay, then I'll wait for you to come home. The Jinghai project had always been personally managed by Mu Qianfan. Now that Mu Qianyu had just taken over, there were still many things he needed to handle. Moreover, an important meeting had just been held yesterday. So, he actually had a lot of official business to deal with today. Besides the documents Lin Shujie brought for him to review and sign, there was also a large pile of pending tasks on the computer. This was after when Jean and Lin Shujie had already filtered through them. Although they were assistants, they held high authority. After all, they were helpers his grandfather had trained for him since childhood. They grew up together, received rigorous training and advanced education. Therefore, Lin Shujie called himself the chief assistant, often directly representing Mu Qianfan. Mu Qianfan continued to be busy after Hiyu left. During this time, he messaged Hiyu to ask if she had arrived home. After confirming she was home, he reminded her to rest early, then didn't disturb her again. By the time Mu Qianfan finally finished all the outstanding work, it was past 3 in the morning. He rubbed his head, sighing inwardly that being sick truly affected his efficiency. And his head seemed to be hurting again. Could it be his old ailment acting up? Hiyu had initially planned to wake up early the next day to visit Mu Qianfan before heading to the company. But then she worried that going too early might disturb his rest, so she gave up on the idea and went straight to work instead. It was so early that Yi Luo naturally hadn't arrived yet. Hiyu practiced by herself in the rehearsal room. With only a few days left, she needed to make a final sprint. If she couldn't win the competition, she at least had to beat He Qingwan. If she couldn't win the competition, she at least had to beat He Qingwan. Though Yi Luo was not easy to get along with, she was very serious and dedicated to her work. These past few days, she had taught Hiyu a lot, proving much more reliable than Su Xiaoyang. Speaking of which, ever since unilaterally breaking his contract with Jiren Company, Su Xiaoyang had disappeared without a trace. When Hiyu casually asked about him, Yi Luo only said that he seemed to have left the industry. Su Xiaoyang was a man who knew how to adapt. Having offended Mu Qianfan, he wished he could vanish completely, just to avoid being sought out by those with ulterior motives to question him about what happened then. If those two women who gave him money found him, they certainly wouldn't let him off if he didn't tell the truth, but if he did tell the truth, young Master Mu would make his life a living hell. For his own safety, he had to run as far as possible, so he had long since taken the money and gone abroad to lay low, planning to deal with future matters after this crisis passed. In the morning, Hiyu called Mu Qianfan and, as soon as he picked up, asked with concern, "How are you feeling? Are you better?" Mu Qianfan, whose mood was excellent thanks to his wife's concern, replied, "With my wife caring for me so much, how could I dare not be well? I wouldn't want to make my wife worry." How could he flirt with her with just a simple greeting? He wanted to palm her face. "That's good. You should rest well in the hospital today. I'll wait for you to come back." The CEO's wife flirting mode had been activated. Of course, he had to flirt with his wife anytime, anywhere. "Okay, I haven't given you my return gift yet. I should be able to give it to you tonight." A return gift. He suddenly remembered their conversation from last night, and her heart couldn't help but quicken. How did she not realize she was so easily flustered by his flirting? A hint of inexplicable panic crept into Hughes' voice. "I need to train. You rest well, and don't get as tired as you were last night. Your health is more important than work." Without waiting for Mu Qianfan to respond, Hugh hurriedly hung up the phone, fearing he might say something else that would stir her heart, especially now that her heart was wide open. However, what she didn't know was that Mu Qianfan wasn't in the hospital at all at that moment. After his checkup, Mu Qianfan went to the company, first holding an emergency meeting, then handling some official business, and even video called Mu Qinyu to hand over matters concerning Jinghai. Most importantly, with a new talent competition approaching, Huimei Company had been causing a lot of trouble both openly and secretly, which was why Yang Yi had been so busy recently. Jiren Company had been managed by Wenjin since its acquisition, but today's matter was a bit tricky, as it involved both Mu Qianfan and Hiyu, forcing him to handle it personally. He were currently in a secret marriage. Only those who attended the engagement banquet at the He family knew about it then, and apart from the He and Lee families, no one else would pay attention. The Lee group failed to acquire Jiren, and instead, Star Moon Media did. In addition, the Jinghai project failed to be intercepted, so the Lee group had long hated Mu Qianfan. Although he was participating in the new talent competition very low-key, and Jiren had not publicized her, Hui Mei had previously pushed her into the public eye to discredit her. Now that her popularity was soaring and her reputation had far surpassed that of He Qingwan, who relied on various promotions and stunts, they decided to deal Jiren and Hiyu a heavy blow. They falsely accused Hiyu of seducing Mu Qianfan, climbing the ladder by using a man, and brazenly defying competition rules by relying on powerful backing despite having already been disqualified. Knowing they were husband and wife, but because they hadn't held a wedding or widely publicized their relationship, the news deliberately omitted this legal connection. Thus, Mu Qianfan, her legal husband, was unfairly portrayed as Hiyu's sugar daddy, damaging Hiyu's reputation. After reporting the situation, Wen Jin commented expressionlessly, "Young master, the competition hasn't even started, and they're already going all out to suppress young madam. Do they have so little confidence?" Mu Qianfan smiled, but his smile was grim and cold. This shows they have some self-awareness, but unfortunately, it's far from enough. They've completely forgotten my past warning. On the day they got their marriage certificate, when Mu Qianfan accompanied Hugh back to the He family to move, he had said that he couldn't control how they treated Hugh before, but if they dared to bully her again, they shouldn't blame him for being ruthless. When Jean looked at Mu Qianfan's fierce gaze, a shock running through her. She hadn't seen this expression on the young master in a long time. It seemed he was truly enraged. They had crossed his bottom line. The young master didn't care about many things because he already had more than enough. So, his family was his bottom line, and young madam was now not only his family, but also his cherished darling. When Jean composed herself, "Young master, your illness hasn't healed yet. Let me handle this matter. You should go back to the hospital. Otherwise, young madam will worry if she finds out." Mu Qianfan narrowed his eyes. "If you don't tell her, how will she know? Remember to tell Ajia not to babble unnecessarily, especially not to young madam. Don't say what shouldn't be said." Wen Jin caught a whiff of danger and quickly nodded. "Okay, I'll tell Ajia later. What about Huimei's matter?" Mu Qianfan's fingers flew across the keyboard. Staring at the computer, he said without turning his head, "You handle it yourself. Make it clean and swift. Don't let it affect her mood for the competition." Her naturally referred to Hiyu. Although she wasn't aiming for the championship this time, he believed in her abilities and didn't want anything to affect her performance. Wen Jin left Mu Qianfan's office and first went to find Lin Shujia, relaying that message to him. It was a warning. She didn't want him to cross the young master's bottom line. Don't be fooled by how gentle the young master usually seemed, even if he was a bit aloof and stern in public. The Lee group offended him in such a way, yet they were still active and kicking. But in reality, it wasn't that he didn't want to thoroughly deal with the Lee group, it was that he didn't want to be so brutal. After all, public opinion was important, and he didn't want to scare others. She never wanted to see the young master in a rage again in her life, because such anger was unbearable for her, and what would trigger the young master's rage was touching his bottom line. She and Lin Shujie grew up together, so she naturally didn't want him to bear the young master's wrath. She only hoped they could always stick to their respective duties and live a stable life. Lin Shujie listened indifferently. "Don't worry, I know the young master's bottom line very well, and I can distinguish between what's important. Besides, I haven't lived enough yet. I won't seek death for no reason." When Jin's tone was very serious. Things have been quite busy lately. Pay attention to everything, and share more of the young master's burdens. It won't be in vain for the old master's painstaking cultivation of us.